Sosa, man, welcome to the show.
Man, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. Probably not the best circumstances, but we'll dive into it and we'll figure out kind of where this team is headed and where they're at.
Yeah, when I kind of planned this show, I really didn't think we talk about the Rams this early. Now, let's kind of hit before we hit what happened on Thursday night, which was ridiculous. This has to be one of the most injured teams in recent history, right? Like I was going through the roster, especially on the offense. How many offensive starters from week one to now actually played every single game? Like one, maybe. I don't think a single skill player did.
Yeah, I think one player, maybe it might have been Rob Havenstein, the right tackle. I want to say Tyler Higbee might have as well, but yeah, like you mentioned, at some point the bill was going to come due in terms of injuries, right? The Rams in 2017, they hired Sean McVay. They had like this big revelation where they invested a lot of money in their sports science department and their training staff and Reggie Scott and all those guys. And they've been probably the healthiest team in the NFL from 2017 to 2022. They did a really good job of staying healthy, but at some point, like it's football, it's a physical game. Somebody's going to get hurt, and somehow those things happen to come in bunches. It looks like, and so for the Rams, I mean, it was uncharacteristic. It was insane. Like you mentioned, I think there was 11 different offensive line combinations already this year. It's literally been a revolving door across the board, other than right tackle, which you do that for any team, it's going to be really hard to win. So that was really the biggest source of the issues. But then, you talk about some of the stars. Cooper Kupp's going to be out for the year. Matthew Stafford out for the year. Aaron Donald, the first time he's ever missed a game due to injury in his career. Allen Robinson on IR. Like it's really bad, obviously, for the Rams. I think at this point they're kind of in talent evaluation mode, and it's better to just let those guys rest up. Maybe if the Rams were in a playoff spot come week 16, 17, or fighting for a playoff spot, some of those guys maybe would have come back. But I think at this point they're just so injury prone. You kind of leave those guys, get them ready for next year, and that's really been the biggest story I think for the Rams this season.
Yeah, and so when I was prepping for this interview, now I like to go back and kind of take a look at what the offense is supposed to look like, right? Go back and try to find a game, well, the latest game where all the key pieces were together, right? That was week one. I had to go all the way back to week one to get that game. But the defense has been intact outside the Donald injury. But like, no, week 12, you can kind of say they were still kind of together. Week one for the offense, where they had the five guys, they protected the offensive line together, where they had their skill guys, where they had Stafford. It's devastated this Rams team, which I think may not be the worst thing, right? Because my first episode with Austin Gale about the Raiders, who we'll talk about in a second, they are in like actual hell. Like they have a lot of issues that to fix. The Rams, yeah, this year was really bad, but you can kind of still see the skeleton of a really good team that was just hampered by injuries.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I think a lot of people overreacted to this season. Like you take it back to week one, you take it back to the offseason. This team, even if healthy, probably not a Super Bowl contender, I don't think. But I think we're talking about a team that's borderline playoffs, maybe a playoff contender, maybe a contender to win the NFC West. I'm not really sure, but they're in that discussion for sure, right? We're talking about a team that could have landed anywhere between 7 to 11 wins, I think. So at the end of the day, like if they stay healthy, this team is still very talented. They still have Sean McVay. They still have all the stars that essentially stepped up for them in that Super Bowl run. Yeah, you lose a few players. That's going to happen when you're so tied up against the salary cap. The Von Millers, they take off. Odell Beckham, kind of still waiting on what's going to happen with him. But I think at the end of the day, it's still a very talented roster. Like there's a lot of good players that remain. They just have to sort of fill in some of those gaps and find lower level players in terms of the draft status, guys in the day 3 of the draft, guys that are making a little bit less money to come step in and fill those holes like they have in the past, because that's kind of always been the approach for the Rams. It's been, I don't want to disrespect these guys, but stars and scrubs sort of where, you got 6, 7 guys that are on your roster that are considered elite level players and they're paid top 3, top 5 among their position, and then everyone else is sort of just fill-ins and little puzzle pieces that they find throughout the way, and then those star players have to carry the weight, and they've been able to do that. The problem is this season a lot of those guys got hurt, so you take out the stars and you put in guys that are again lower level players. It's very hard because those stars have typically been able to carry the weight for the Rams, but like you mentioned, still a very talented roster. I think you got to feel pretty decent with where they're at.
Right, and I like how you talk about the stars and scrubs, right? Because that's kind of how the NFL is built, right? You only have so much money, so many resources. The Rams know how to invest in the right spots. Right? They know that they don't need to spend all this money on a rotational edge rusher. They know where to spend the money, how to spend the money, and overall, yeah, it's been really good. Obviously, the lack of draft capital kind of hurts it with the depth, right? Because you don't really have any young guys behind that are up and coming, which we saw that kind of really shine through this year, which has been kind of a problem. But I do want to turn my attention to the Thursday night game real quick. Baker Mayfield comes on, essentially from Carolina on Tuesday, plays on Thursday, beats the Raiders. That's very impressive. Right? Like I don't think anyone expected him to be that good that soon. Like he struggled mightily for the first half. Even though you can kind of see some of the throws were there, but they didn't really know the playbook. And then he pulls out a win against the Raiders, where the Raiders just can't win. But that's also a whole different issue. Yeah. Two-part question here: how impressed were you with what the Rams and Baker Mayfield did on Thursday? And if Matthew Stafford isn't healthy, which from sources talking to them, they were already saying that Stafford's arm was way more injured than was previously being reported, and that he might be looking to retirement sooner than later. If Stafford can't come back, or if Stafford does come back and he's at a position where he is not the same player, would you feel comfortable with a Baker Mayfield for a year until you regain some draft capital?
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll start with the first one. I was shocked with how he performed. I mean, we're talking about a guy here that he was with the team for like 30 hours. That is absurd. He obviously couldn't know even a quarter of the playbook, never mind, anything else. I want to say they probably had like a strict 7 to 15 play game plan, and Sean McVay's obviously kind of radioing and everything, and he's sort of repeating it and whatever. But it was crazy because the timing between him and the receivers was pretty decent for a guy that probably never even threw to them, and the resolve, like just getting in there and pretty much playing the whole game. He didn't play the first drive, which I'm still not sure what that was about. I want to say maybe something contract related for John Wolford. They want to get him that start, so to speak. But it was very impressive. I mean, I've seen John Wolford, I've seen Bryce Perkins, I've seen the Matthew Staffords, obviously. And it's very noticeable, the difference in talent when you look at a guy like a Stafford or a Mayfield and then some of the backups, right? Like he's got a very strong arm. He was throwing the ball pretty accurately. And then that last drive was obviously crazy to see. I was highly impressed. It was very, very fun to watch. That broke a 6-game losing skid, I believe it was, for the Rams. So it's been a long time coming and kind of ruins the draft capital, but it is what it is. These guys don't care. That's more of a fan thing. So very impressed. That was awesome to see, and he's obviously going to start the rest of the way, barring any kind of injury or anything like that. So good for him. He's going to get a little chance here to put some good stuff on tape, and he's going to be a free agent, obviously, at the end of the year as well. So could put himself in a good position to make some money, whether that be with the Rams or someone else. So that takes us into the next question. I think there is a lot of gray area with where Matthew Stafford is at right now. And he suffers this neck injury, concussion in back-to-back weeks, pretty much. They shut him down for the year, which was the right call in my opinion. And then, like you mentioned, he even came into this year with some elbow stuff, which they were kind of discussing as like a baseball-style injury, maybe like a Tommy John type of thing. And the Rams are pretty notorious for playing down these injuries. They've always done that. To what degree was it bugging him? I just don't know. They kept it very, very hush-hush, and I'm not certain. So that I can't say really whether I thought that it affected his throws or how injured he was. But, I mean, this is a guy that's been very banged up over the course of his career. Very tough. He usually finds a way to play through it, and I think he probably could have continued playing even this season. But there's been a lot of stuff going on. You listen to his wife on her podcast. She's, crying, talking about concussions and all this kind of stuff, and if she wants him to walk away, and she's basically saying that, yeah, she would love for him to walk away, but that's obviously up to him. So I think there's a lot of gray area for the Rams there, and they really got to figure out, are they going to be able to move forward with him? Is he going to choose to retire? He just got an extension last year, so I'm going to presume that he'll probably come back. I think that's where he's leaning, and that's ultimately what's going to happen. So with the Baker thing, it's really going to be tough to tell. I think over the next 4 games or 5 games, however many remain, I would be able to get a better gauge of how I would feel Baker, starting for the Rams potentially next year if Stafford doesn't come back or whatever. I think based off of his career up to this point, I wouldn't love it. But at the same time, like you mentioned, the Rams don't have a first round pick. They don't have a ton of salary cap space, almost none really. They're not really in a good position to get themselves a new quarterback if something were to happen or if Stafford were to retire. So Baker would probably be your best option, right? Like this is a guy who he can win you games, I think. And the only problem is you're sort of in like that QB or NFL purgatory stage where you might win 7 games or 8 games or that kind of thing, and not good enough to make the playoffs, not bad enough to get a top 5 pick to go get a quarterback. But, I would be fine with it, especially after watching the John Wolfords, the Bryce Perkins. I think with Stafford's injury history, you got to go into next season with someone who's a little bit more reliable at that backup spot, and I think Mayfield fits that structure.
Right, because how much worse is Baker Mayfield than Jared Goff?
Probably not much.
Right, like it's pretty close. Like you could say Goff's having a pretty good year this year, so maybe you put him above him right now. But Baker's had years where he's made Goff, look stupid.
Yeah,
and we've seen Sean McVay win with Goff, not the whole thing, but win enough. Like that, I still think the game between the Rams and the Chiefs that was supposed to be in Mexico, but it wasn't in Mexico in the 2019 season. It's like one of the best games I've ever watched.
Yeah,
right. And like that was they put up a ton of offense with a quarterback that we know is limited. Baker Mayfield, not much different. So I feel like if they did have to roll with it, I think it wouldn't be the worst thing.
Yeah.
I do think Matt Stafford's going to want to come back. I don't know if he physically can. He is, as the graphic read before, one complete season in the past 4 years. I don't know if his body, like he got beat up in his early years in Detroit. I don't know if he can do it anymore.
Yeah.
That arm was already looking kind of weak. Like there were some ducks that he was throwing this year, and even last year, but there were some serious ducks. It was like he couldn't really put the same arm. Remember, he used to go like a howitzer back in the day, right? He could fling that ball in Detroit. Not the same, And you could say, yeah, it's age, he's almost 35 years old, but you can definitely tell that the injuries are starting to catch up to Matthew Stafford, and if he can't play, then I would rather go with Baker Mayfield than John Wolford. Nothing against the AAF legend, but you need somebody out there. But regardless of quarterback, the offensive line is horrible, and we knew that after week 1, right?
Yeah.
And I think Rams fans were kind of dismissive of the offensive line issue because of Joseph Noteboom, that everyone just thought he can step into Whitworth's shoes and replace this all-pro left tackle and he'd be fine, which I never thought was the case. I didn't dislike Noteboom. I think he's a solid tackle, not great, but there was nothing in his history that made you think, oh yeah, this guy is, a tier below Whitworth. He is many tiers below, and you're seeing this offensive line is having some serious issues.
Yeah, by far, I think that was the biggest miscalculation going into this season. I mean, the Rams had a history of doing this as well. You go back to 2019, it was a very similar kind of thing. 2018, they go to the Super Bowl. 2019, they lose a few players over the course of free agency, and they go into the season with a subpar offensive line, thinking for whatever reason they can get past it, and they didn't make the playoffs that year. That was the only year up until now, of course, that they didn't make the playoffs under Sean McVay. And now the same thing. They go to the Super Bowl last year. They actually win this time, and you lose a right guard in Austin Corbett in free agency, and he's one of the better guards in the season, in the NFL this season. And then, your center, Brian Allen, they bring back, but he gets hurt. Joe Noteboom, like you mentioned, he steps in at left tackle. They pay him a good amount of money this offseason to replace Andrew Whitworth, and, good luck trying to replace a Hall of Famer. And then you go, into the season hoping that you get a third-round rookie in Logan Bruss to start, tears his ACL in training camp. So you're already, there's a lot of things kind of moving and changing here. So you go into the season, I think that was probably the biggest miscalculation. As left tackle, Andrew Whitworth, legend, you can slide pass pro away from this guy. He's that good. And when you can put him on an island and slide pass pro help away, all of a sudden the guys that maybe aren't as good, they're getting help more often. They can perform a little bit better. Whereas this season, you could try to do that with Joseph Noteboom, but it ain't going to work out the same, and we've seen it. I mean, he was struggling mightily. He was one of the worst offensive linemen on the team. And, that's not a knock too much on him. It's because his job is arguably harder than everyone else's when you're sliding past pro away. But the problem was no one else was really good either. And so, like you mentioned, I think a lot of us felt decent about Noteboom, like a league average tackle. Maybe that was his ceiling. But if you have 4 other very good linemen, then I think you can get by with that kind of a thing. Whereas if he's maybe your best lineman or second best lineman, there's probably going to be some issues. So that was really just the problem. I mean, the O-line was really, really awful. We knew that even going into week one, like you mentioned, they were not good. Like, they just weren't good enough.
Yeah.
And then you introduce a few more injuries, and they just never stood a chance. And it's just very confusing to me because they know that Stafford is not a mobile quarterback. He's never been. He's getting up there in age. He's getting slower. He's getting more hurt. I don't know how
Right.
you could possibly think that you could get away with an offensive line with and I'm not going to knock it because they did pour resources into it. They did pay Joseph Noteboom. They paid Brian Allen. They drafted a third-round rookie. They just missed pretty much on all of them. And I don't know. I'm very confused as to what their plan was. I would have loved to hear them, kind of embark on why they went about it that way. Me personally, I would have invested everything I had in that offensive line to try and make sure that Stafford could be upright. So that was the biggest miscalculation and obviously pretty much ruined the season right from the start.
Right. With the Noteboom thing, it kind of reminds me, as a Giant fan, it reminds me of when Gelman traded away Beckham and then signed Shepard to this huge deal. I was like, don't worry, he's just as good. Like,
Yeah.
no, paying the guy more money doesn't make him better. Right? Like, he is what he is. Noteboom is what he is. Yeah, is his ceiling probably a bit higher than an average tackle? Yeah, but we knew there was nothing to say that in year one he was going to be more than that, right?
Yeah.
And I do like Brian Allen. I think he's very good. He played game one, and I think he was out for like 8 weeks, something like that, and then came back pretty recently. So, and losing your center, I know center doesn't get a whole lot of love because it is what it is, right? A lot of NFL fans understand the sport playing video games because they really never got past high school ball. Center is so important.
Yeah.
It's one of the most important linemen on the team. I was supposed to say after left tackle, center is the most important. Losing your center, especially when you have an inexperienced line, is huge. So losing him was pretty rough. So we know the issues with this team, and there's not a lot of like ammo to restock. Right, going into next season, what do you do here? Because the defense is still pretty good, like they're league average, good enough to win with, right?
Yep.
But what do you do with these guys? Do you move on from guys like Leonard Floyd and Aaron Donald and Bobby Wagner to try to help out this offense that is severely struggling and get some offensive line help? Because right now I think it's a second, a third rounder, and a few sixth rounders. It's not great when you need immediate help on the offensive line.
Yeah. I think that is the biggest question is they need to figure out where they are going in this offseason because this is going to be a very transitional or transformational, just key offseason for this team. I think we got to figure out is Sean McVay going to stay or is he going to walk? And I think he'll stay. And then you figure out the next step, which is Matthew Stafford coming back? Is Aaron Donald going to retire? Obviously, he nearly did last year. And, are you going to be able to keep some of these veterans around? And if you do, then I think you kind of change the plan versus if you don't, some of these guys retire, then you kind of sell off everything you possibly can. And I think you tank next year, which I think is very, very, very unlikely. So we'll go with the more realistic option, which I think is Stafford comes back. Aaron Donald probably comes back as well. And from that point, I think you got to figure out where you want to go. Offensively, they definitely need more help than they do on the defensive side of the ball. And some of the names that you mentioned, I think, are where the discussion really starts because Leonard Floyd getting paid a lot of money next year. I mean, I think it's like above $20 million. So solid player.
Yeah, I think 22, I think, is the cap next year.
Yeah, exactly. So a ton of money. And no offense to him, but he just certainly didn't live up to that this year. And I don't even think that's necessarily a fault of his, right? Von Miller walks, you have to suddenly now be the number one edge rusher. You got to be the number two defensive lineman. Whereas, last year he's maybe the number 3 or 4 behind Donald, Von Miller, and some of these other guys. So he's just not that guy that you can have as that edge one. And I think you got to figure out if you can save any money there, if you can restructure, or if you can cut him and start to reallocate those resources elsewhere. Outside of that, though, there's going to be very sparse places, I think, for the Rams to figure out where they can free up some money. Joe Noteboom's another option. Outside of that, though, I mean, you paid Allen Robinson. You have to find a way to make it work. There's no money to be saved there at all next year. And I think if they could, they probably would get rid of him. But it just doesn't seem like it's going to be a possibility. There's a lot of questions to answer here. I think probably the most realistic thing you have to look at is how can you get a number one edge rusher or somebody to step in there? And they try to get Brian Burns by trading 2 first-round picks and a second at the trade deadline, which is absurd. And by the way, I kind of liked it. I agreed with it, but
No, I'm fine with that.
yeah, you got to get an edge rusher like that, or somebody to that level. They tried getting Daniil Hunter in the offseason last year too to replace Von Miller when he walked. That's the biggest one. Next thing, cornerback. Are you going to get another corner two, another boundary guy, another nickel guy? Like, there's a lot of questions there. I think even though Rams fans hate this, I brought it up. I think trading Jalen Ramsey might be like the biggest domino to kind of figure out this offseason, because you're not going to trade Aaron Donald. He's going to retire as a Ram, I think. Stafford, he's either going to retire or come back. He's not going to get traded. And there's really nobody else to go anywhere. Like, nobody's going to trade for Leonard Floyd contract. Nobody's going to do that for Allen Robinson. The one piece that you have that is worth a lot still, that you can free up some actual money with by getting rid of, and when I say get rid of, I mean trade, is Jalen Ramsey. And his game has not been, elite this season, I don't think. And I'm not even going to knock him for that. He probably, these guys are probably checked out to some degree. But I think that's probably the biggest one you have to figure out here. Like, if you can get a number one and maybe some change from a team that, wants that extra push to go get a Super Bowl, maybe like a Dallas Cowboys team that could use a boundary corner like that, I think you really, really have to consider that. But, that would be a hard pill to swallow, because how do you get an Aaron Donald to come back and sell this idea that you're trying to compete, but at the same time get rid of an elite level corner? I just don't know. It's such a hard question to answer, because there's not a lot of money savings to be had, and there's a lot of players that aren't living up to their contracts right now. I think, one of them that is Bobby Wagner. I think you have to bring him back no matter how much that money is. It's a lot of money as well. I think it's probably close to $15 million next year.
Yeah, I mean, like around 12. Like that. Yeah, it's a lot.
He was just so good. I mean, he was not only the leader on the defensive side of the ball, but other than Aaron Donald, like, he was the one guy that showed up week after week this season for the Rams. He still looks like an elite level linebacker. So a lot of questions. I honestly don't know how they're going to answer them. I think they'll probably get creative, restructure a lot of guys, Cooper Kupp, some of these other ones, and they'll free up some cap space, and then they can kind of fill in some veteran stop gaps and things like that. But, man, there's certainly a lot of questions. I really think nobody's safe at this point.
No, I agree with you, and I agree. I bring back Wagner. He's done an amazing job. The issue I have with trading Ramsey is that his play is definitely down this year. He's still a top 10 corner in the NFL, and you need that great corner, right? So it's like you're going to trade him for a few picks, and then it's kind of like it's the old Family Guy sketch. Like, no, it could be anything. It could be even be a boat, right? Yeah. Like, you don't want to be John Robinson and trade away AJ Brown to get more picks, hoping to get AJ Brown again. Like, you already had him. Like, you don't want to get rid of it. I agree. Leonard Floyd probably has to go, right? Because you can probably save around $15 million if you do a post June 1 release. Yeah, no one's going to take that contract. He wasn't worth that contract to begin with. Yep. And yet the secondary, all have been pretty decent. I think both safeties and the nickel are available this year free agent wise. They have to upgrade their second corner anyway. I do wonder, like, do you try to package or try to trade a couple of these later day 3 picks for some veteran linemen that are going to get cut by their teams? Because we've seen that before, right? People able to package day 3 picks for aging linemen, aging receivers, and it's worked in the past. Obviously, it's not going to solve your left tackle problem, but the Rams are kind of stuck with Noteboom, right? Like, they really have to hope that he works out. But just getting one more guy in there. But yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because I agree they're going to restructure some dudes. They have to restructure some dudes. They don't have much of a choice. Yeah. But this team really, if everyone comes back healthy and they can just make 1 or 2 moves, this team is still a contender in the West. And still, I don't know if this is a Super Bowl team. If Stafford gets hot, absolutely. Yeah. But this is the window, and you have to kind of ride with it and die with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I mean, it feels like they're so far away from contending, which they are obviously with the record this year. But, you make a move or two here or there. Some other guys step up, maybe improve. Some guys get healthy, whatever. Like, you're talking about a team that I don't think is very far off. Now, there's a lot of holes. A lot of question marks even. You look at that offensive line class in free agency, there's going to be some names. I think maybe like a Taylor Lewan gets cut from Tennessee. You might want to look into that. I believe David Edwards is a free agent, the starting left guard. He's pretty much not played this season. So, you're going to get the right guard, Logan Bruss, back, who tore his ACL last year. That's probably a guy they're going to want to start and figure out what that is there. So, I think there is some answers and some potential answers, but It really just depends on how close I think they are to competing, because that's really going to answer how far they're willing to kind of dig into that bag and push that price to be paid a little bit next year. Because if you think you got a chance, which they probably do, they seem to always think that, you're more willing to restructure some of these guys. You're more willing to trade some of these future picks and kind of let that next year problem come to be at that point. But I'm very interested to see, because I feel like to this point we've kind of had a good gauge for what the Rams want to do and how they go about these off seasons. But this one, it's very hard for me to kind of put my finger on and see where they're going to go, because there is a lot of free agents coming up, not a ton of money, not a lot of draft picks, and they got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no, that's kind of one of those things we got to just let it ride, right? We'll see what happens, and they need Allen Robinson or Tyler Higbee to step up. I'm not sure we can always rely on all pro Ben Skoranek over here making ridiculous plays.
Yeah.
But man, I'm way more optimistic about the Rams than I am about the Broncos or the Raiders. Raiders we just spoke last time, in the Broncos I'll talk about it next week. Honestly, the Rams fans need to chill out a bit. All 7 of you guys. I know most of them changed over to Raiders clothes last week. But overall, I don't think it's terrible. Sosa, man, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find your work now?
Yep, I'm always on Twitter, at QB's MEP, kind of chopping it up these days and laying low a little bit. But you can also find all of our stuff at Underdog. The account is at UD__NFL. All the NFL news and transactional stuff that you can imagine. So if you're into knowing what's going on in the NFL, everything is handled over there.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.